call you? Yes, you did.
Yeah,
Please, please.
okay.
Alfred, can you meet me really quick? Give it like 2-3 minutes to let all the media join.
Okay,
They're all still logging in here.
very good.
And Marilyn, I'm fixing the blog post right now so that it has the Facebook feed instead. Okay, the blog post is live. Let me check the media here. Let's give it another minute or so. We got 3/4 of our media group. Efren, can you get me tight on the podium with the main camera? Cheers. Let's do a quick audio test, Mayor.
1, 2, 3.
Can folks on the Zoom hear us okay? Give us a head nod. Excellent. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Daryl Steinberg. I'm privileged to be the mayor of Sacramento. This morning I am joined by a number of elected and civic leaders throughout Sacramento to make a very important announcement. Among my colleagues, I am joined by the Vice Mayor of the City of Sacramento, Jeff Harris. I am joined by council members Alan Warren, Jay Schneer, Eric Guetta, and Rick Jennings. And if I'm missing any of my colleagues, I'm sorry. I will make that up and introduce you throughout the course of the event. I'm also joined by the Reverend T. Porter from the Genesis Baptist Church, who you will hear from in a moment. Thank you for joining us. Mario Guerrero, the head of the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission, who will also speak. We're joined by Letitia Watson, who is our brand new director of the Office of Public Safety Accountability by Zoom. Joined by Susanna Akala-Wood, who is our city attorney. Cassandra Jennings, the executive director of the Sacramento Urban League, who will speak. Thank you for being here. Larry Lee from the Sacramento Observer, who will also share a few words. And joining us in solidarity are Rachel Rios from La Familia, Rick Jennings, Councilmember Rick Jennings, I already introduced, I'm sorry, Chet Hewitt, the leader of the Sierra Health Foundation, Stephanie Wynn from Asian Resources, and Michael Marion, a member of the Sacramento Police Review Commission. Good morning to everyone. We gather this morning to announce 2 major police reform proposals. In addition to these 2 lead proposals, I will also put forward today a declaration committing to dedicating the remainder of my election terms over the next 4.5 years to do all I can to end systemic racism in Sacramento. I know our entire city government will commit to the same. In the days ahead, we will announce a formal mechanism to engage our city and our community in a long-term look inside in all parts of our city and community life, including law enforcement, to change the laws, the policies, the behaviors, the budgets, and the actions to reflect that commitment. Our community is crying out for zero tolerance of police brutality and any forms of racism, and it is a call being repeated throughout our entire country. Our community and our country is right. George Floyd's death was not only a vicious murder, it also tore open the fear and the trauma that African Americans experience far too often in their daily lives. We will also, in the days ahead, ensure our compliance with the 8 Can't Wait and meet with our police commission to consider their important and detailed recommendations. We will look at the Department of Justice review of our police department and see what changes we still need to make. We will push for the passage of legislation banning neck holds statewide and setting up a special unit in the Attorney General's office to review deadly force incidents for potential criminal prosecution. Today, we only begin. We are living through history in real time. We are experiencing an essential sea change in American culture. We must be leading that change, not standing aside or watching from behind. The 2 proposals I bring forward today are not intended as the end or even the middle of a long overdue course correction on true accountability for police misconduct and redefining the roles and the responsibilities of our modern day police department. The first proposal is to change the long-standing practice that the police department exclusively investigates their own when an officer shoots someone, an individual dies while in custody, or an officer is accused of excessive force which results in serious bodily injury. Let us be honest with ourselves and with each other. No matter our progress and the positive changes we have made under the leadership of Police Chief Daniel Hahn, together we have a collective credibility problem. We have no system of required independent investigations in the most serious cases of alleged peace officer misconduct. Nothing else we do around police reform will have nearly the positive impact we hope until we fix this. I propose the establishment of an Inspector General reporting directly to the Mayor and the City Council through its Office of Public Safety Accountability. The Inspector General will have broad powers and a responsibility to fully and publicly investigate any officer-involved shooting, death while in custody, and police use of force that results in serious bodily injury. The Inspector General will be charged with interviewing witnesses, issue subpoenas for relevant evidence, and most important, publicly announce their findings, conclusions, and recommended discipline if warranted. The Inspector General will report the above to the Citizens Police Commission, the City Council, and the public. The Commission itself will have full opportunity to review the Inspector General's findings and make its own public recommendations on any aspect of the investigation, including potential discipline. The City Manager will not make any decision on a pending case until the Inspector General and Commission have fully and timely weighed in. The second proposal requires us to reimagine modern-day policing. It is time to show the community that we are listening to and are willing to translate our imaginings into systems change, and into real action. I propose we invest $5 million now to establish a new city department for non-law enforcement responses to 911 calls that do not involve criminal activity. We all know that our police officers are the first and the last resort for all calls involving community crisis. Large percentages of calls and even larger amounts of public resources are spent on law enforcement responding to calls involving mental health, homelessness, and other difficult situations that don't involve the actual commission of crimes. Our police force must no longer be the first and last option for virtually every situation. For this isn't what police officers signed up for. And the presence of even a compassionate officer with a gun and a uniform too often invokes fear and trauma in people crying out for help. The new unit will provide trained, community-based outreach teams to diffuse, to de-escalate, and to help people with thousands of calls where law enforcement is plain not necessary or helpful. The $5 million that I propose is merely a down payment. I am not interested in pilots or in years of playing around the edges, for I believe we must set a new policy in the capital city that represents the beginnings of actual systemic change. I propose that over the next 24 months, we permanently shift calls and responses not involving actual crimes from our police department to the new Department of Community Response. The money we are currently spending within the police department for these calls and responses will be shifted to the new department and the new function. 24 months will ensure that we make these changes thoughtfully. The $5 million now will ensure that we do not wait. I conclude with this. We must do better as a city and a country, and we must do it by action, not merely by speeches, written words, or poignant photos. We must do it now, not tomorrow. Those of us entrusted by the public with positions of leadership bear a special responsibility to embrace the discomfort this moment has caused and follow through with action, rather than hoping and expecting that things will just settle down and return to normal. It is long past time. Thank you. Let me now turn it over to the Reverend Tikoy Porter, Genesis Baptist Church. Porter? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Again, my name is Dr. Tikoy Porter, and I serve as the senior pastor of the Genesis Church in South Sacramento. And I am also the state chair of the California State National Action Network and president of its Sacramento chapter. The National Action Network is one of the leading civil rights organizations in the nation, founded by Reverend Al Sharpton, promoting a modern civil rights agenda that includes the fight for one's fairness and the institution of concrete measures that will take on systemic racism in law enforcement. And I believe that the changes Mayor Steinberg and our City Council are calling for in the creation of the Independent Inspector General position and a clear delineation of duties for police officers, the new layers of accountability and oversight, and the creation of a new city corps of non-law enforcement responders so that Sacramento police officers will no longer be required to respond to calls that don't actually involve a crime are important and significant first steps, again, first steps towards these goals. The simple truth of the matter is that what is working now is not working. Too many Black and brown Americans are being killed needlessly due to police who choose to wrongly use their position to enact racial violence under the cover of the law. The recent shooting and killing of Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, Georgia is just another example of this and how much policing needs to change. The time is past due that we have fundamental reform within our policing and public safety so that all people are protected equally instead of just a few. No one deserves to die with a knee on their neck. No one deserves to be shot twice in the back for sleeping in their car. No one deserves to be shot multiple times in their grandmother's backyard because they mistook a cell phone for a gun. And while I support these proposals by the mayor and council, I want to challenge them and all of our government officials to not stop, pause, or delay this process. We must seize this moment to make change quickly to root out this virus of systemic racism within the city that we all love, Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much, Dr. Porter. Let me turn it over now to Mario Guerrero, who is the head of the Sacramento Police Review Commission. Please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor, council members, and community leaders. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I want to particularly thank the Mayor. I think your announcements for reform today reflect structural reform. And importantly, they reflect that you are listening, you and the council are listening and leading on these issues. The call for reform is loud and clear. This morning I read that California's largest unions, police unions, are calling for reform, including weeding out racist officers, getting them out of the force. I think though that reflects the time that we are in and the kinds of things that we need to do. We need to go broad and we need to go deep in terms of policies and the activities that we do to get racism out of police work. That being said, I do look forward to seeing the policies, the actual detailed policies. As someone that works in policy and as chair of the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission, I know that details matter. And I invite the community, I invite our leaders to ensure that we look at the details of the policies. I also look forward to working with the mayor, the city, and our residents. The recommendations from the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission from 2018 and 2019 are still relevant. In many ways, they go beyond some of the calls from national groups. And I believe that they do need their day before the council, and I really appreciate the fact that we have agreed to take them up. And I look forward to the community being part of that process, because that is also another first step. It's not the middle and it's not the end. It's another step to really looking at structural reform. So once again, I want to thank the mayor and the council for your leadership. I want to thank the community for all of the work that has been done and all of the pressure that's been put on ensuring that we pay attention to these issues and that we really create reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mario, for your service and also the service of all of your fellow commissioners. Let me now ask Cassandra Jennings. Please come forward.
Thank you, Mayor Steinberg, and thank you to all of the leaders in the community and the council members. I must say that again, this weekend, the unsettling and sort of social unrest consumed my mind, my thoughts, and my heart as I asked the question, how does an unarmed African-American young man in Atlanta go from sleeping in his car to cooperating to scuffle to death. It just doesn't make sense. My heart goes out to the family of Rayshawn Brooks, to his wife that lost a husband, to those children that will never be able to experience their father again. And unless we forget, we still cry out for the loss of our own, Stephon Clark, and the more recent deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, and all the others. The protest, the cry is loud. The voices are being heard. And unless we don't say Black Lives Matter, we don't see the change we want to see. I am a mother of a son and a daughter, and we have a total, my husband and I, we have 6 grandchildren, not 3, but 6. How does it make sense? Who's next? Enough is enough. Unless we take action, we will have this conversation over and over and over again. Enough is enough. We need the systemic change that builds accountability, that is sustainable and scalable to protect all communities. The change we need must be through 3 areas: justice, legislation, and economic infusion. We call it here inclusive economic development. Today, on behalf of the Greater Sacramento Urban League, and we stand with urban leagues across the country as we support the 8 Can't Wait, as we support here in the state of California, AC 85, that really sort of appeals to 209, that we can begin to talk about race as a positive thing in our community. And I'm glad to say that we stand here today with Mayor Steinberg, the council, the community leaders, saying, let's reimagine public safety that will increase accountability and develop a new corps of responders for non-law enforcement issues. The independent inspector will allow fair and just review of police-involved incidences, as well as it will give more involvement and participation of the Community Police Review Commission. That's in the right direction. This, added to the proactive accountability and training of policies with ongoing review and measurement. We can't just wait till after the incident happens. We have to continue to improve our processes that we prevent these incidents from ever happening again. The new Corps will allow a shift in the resources that we heard loud and clear from all the people that will build a strong community, focused public safety to serve and protect all the citizens of our great city. Let's not forget. Let's take this step forward to change what we want to see. Let us be a leader here in Sacramento for the whole nation to know that Black Lives Matter, and the changes will reflect that will serve them and make a better place for all of us. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your forward thinking, and let this be a first step in a movement that will change forever. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Cassandra, for those eloquent words. Before I ask Larry Lee, the publisher, of course, of the Sacramento Observer, to share a few words, I did note that Reverend Kevin Ross is here joining us by Zoom, and I wanted to welcome him as well. Larry, Mr. Lee, you on the call?
Yes, I am. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. Welcome.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Larry Lee, president and publisher of the Sacramento Observer newspaper. The Observer is, of course, the city's African-American newspaper, which has been publishing and documenting the chronicles of African-Americans here in Sacramento since 1962. I'd like to take a moment to applaud the mayor and the council for his and their leadership in this moment today. Our Black community is hurting and is in need of elected leaders that are willing to have a conversation about reimagining a better community in which we live. Our Black community needs peace. We need to feel safe. Right now, we do not feel safe. Many of us have been traumatized and are afraid to call authorities to come to our aid out of fear of getting a military response that could go fatally wrong. It's important to note that this is just the first step in addressing the racist and systemic failures of our institutions when it comes to the Black community. Let's be clear, as tax-paying citizens, our systems have failed us. The justice system has failed us, the education system has failed us, banking system has failed us, healthcare system has failed us, and on and on. So I'm thankful to the mayor and the council, and that they're open to saying, what was done yesterday with public safety is not what we are going to do tomorrow. We welcome the opportunity to imagine and design real peace and safety in our region through these policy, systems, and structural changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. I also note on the Zoom, and I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone, but I saw Pastor Lynn Heron on the Zoom as well, so welcome to you. Let me now ask any of my city council colleagues if they want to share a few words. Obviously, they're going to have to deliberate on these policies, and so, but I think it's appropriate to give you an opportunity as city leadership to express a few words. Let me start with Vice Mayor Jeff Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the council and also these great community leaders who have very vibrant words to say. You know, racism is real in America. It hasn't changed much since I was a little kid, but one thing has changed. We see it a lot more. We see it because of body cams, because of phone cameras. We can't turn a blind eye anymore to a problem that has plagued America since its inception. I think this is a good thing. It's time for us to reflect upon reality. I've thought a couple of times since the death of George Floyd, what if we hadn't seen that? What if that man had fallen, been the victim of a homicide, and nobody noticed? Well, that's happened a lot in America, and it's truly time for that to change. I think that the reforms that the mayor is bringing forward are good ones. People have cried out for a long time for an independent inspection of police shootings that turn fatal. This is not a bad thing. I think the city can afford it, and I think that we should move forward with that. Also, by freeing up the police department by not going to calls that do not involve an infraction of the law, they can turn their attention where they're most needed, which is solving crimes. So I think we're on the right track here. These are good reforms. I believe that the council will probably deliberate and adopt them. Another thing I'd like to say is this Inspector General position, an independent investigative body embodied or ensconced in the Office of Public Safety Accountability, is a good step forward. We have a new director, Letitia Watson, and I have great faith that she will make changes and reach out to the community in a very effective way so that this discussion does not fizzle out, does not get buried, but becomes very effective and robust so that we can build more trust in the community and I think ultimately create a more just Sacramento. Of course, the real reasons for what we experience in Sacramento is based on a disparity of equality in terms of opportunity for all communities of color. We as a council have the charge to create the opportunity for all people in this city to be able to live a good and safe life. And so that's the real work. I think that that is the underpinning of what we really need to do as a council to continue to strive and move forward to create opportunity for all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. Would any of my colleagues, City Council colleagues, want to add anything? you don't have to forever hold your peace because you're going to have a full opportunity to weigh in. Any members of the community that are community leadership that are on the line
Mr.
briefly?
Mayor, this is Alan.
Yes, Alan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I just, I think given the circumstances and everything that's happening, and the fact that you're stepping forward with initiatives I think should be applauded. I want to also thank the Vice Mayor. I think, as we continue to try to do the city's business on the council, it's very important that our perspectives are viewed in similar lenses, even though we come from different backgrounds. And what I've heard so far is that there's a real recognition of the disparities that exist in this city as it relates to the treatment of African Americans in employment opportunities, economic, the way they're being policed, the way we're being educated. And so, with that being said, it would seem to me that the climate, the time is right for constructive and lasting change. And so I want to be a part of that discussion. I want to be a part of the ultimate results that make Sacramento more inclusive and a better place for everybody. And I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues to help do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else before we open it up to questions from other community and or council?
Hello, Mayor. This is Rachel Rios, Director of Lafayette Counseling Center, and thank you again. I just wanted to also thank you for taking this first step. It is a step in the right direction. The truth is that we know that we need to be more transparent about these reports within our law enforcement community. And creating this office will in fact safeguard law enforcement's integrity by providing that oversight and that transparency, and providing recommendations on how we can continue to improve. We know we need these changes. We know that we need to build trust in our community and need to fill out staff. In terms of the differential response, this is also the right step, but it does require a lot of thoughtful planning and open discussion. It cannot just be a shift in resources. We know that we need to identify how we continue to protect our most vulnerable communities, which too often are people of color. And so I look forward to working with you in terms of ensuring that we have thoughtful and intentional planning in terms of how we shift the resources to our communities. I think this is a great step, and I hope that the council will consider strongly and take appropriate action. Thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you all very, very much. Let us open it up to questions now from members of the press. Andrew, for any of either me, obviously, any of the speakers, or any of the other community leaders that are present.
First up is Andy Judson from ABC 10.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Can you all hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Okay, great, thanks. So Chief Hahn previously told ABC 10 in an interview that they have a police officer physically respond to about 480 calls a day, and the call center receives about 1,800 calls a day. He told us that if they were to disband or defund the police department, who would respond to that? So I'm just wondering if reallocating the $5 million and creating a new department will cover that amount of need for response in our community.
Well, first of all, the $5 million will allow us to get started assertively and not wait over the course of many months or 2 years to show actual progress. I believe it will take several weeks, if not 60 days, to actually get a complete assessment reviewed by the council and the community about what percentage and what is the dollar value of that percentage of calls that come into the 911 that police respond to that don't have anything to do with underlying serious crime. And once we know that number and we can all get our arms around it, we then can begin that process of shifting the resources and shifting the duties to this new department. I know through the years years, we have seen various studies. I know in the downtown area, for example, it is estimated, and it's an estimate, that police officers spend about 30% of the calls relate to responding to issues of homelessness. So that gives you one idea, but we want to do a broader look, again, over the next weeks and at most 60 days, so that we get the actual number of calls. We can debate what some might argue would be tweeners, whether it belongs on the police side or the non-law enforcement side, and have a very clear idea of the number of calls and the dollar value associated. Because that dollar value, again, the proposal is to shift over 24 months on top of the $5 million, those resources to help ensure a longer-term funding for this new department.
Next up, I have Tony from the SAC Observer. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Tony. You're able to ask directly.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, Mayor, this is a question for you. This it sounds like a public health issue. What I mean by that, excessive force, police brutality. Are you saying that some of these actions by the Sacramento Police Department over the years, decades, are a public health issue and should be addressed or investigated by other entities? Can you please explain that?
Well, remember, there's two pieces. The investigation piece is a very clear call for an independent review. Again, let me review the three categories. Any officer-involved shooting, whether it involves any serious injury or death, obviously including serious injury or death. Any death of an individual while in police custody. And the third category is force, police force, which results in serious bodily injury. Those three categories of cases would be in a mandatory way investigated by the Inspector General with the reporting as I described earlier. So that's the investigation piece. On the shifting of resources and responsibilities to a new Office of Community Response. By the way, there are people better than me who can come up with the right name for what it might be called. That is in response to a number. This is a response to the moment, and not just the moment, but the years and decades of real life experience for our communities, especially our communities of color, and frankly the police officers as well. You talk to most police officers, they don't want to respond to most of these calls because it is not what they are trained to do. And I think we must acknowledge, when it comes to issues of race, that the prospect of being confronted, let's take mental health, which is the most obvious situation. The family member that calls 911 because their loved one is in crisis. There's issues that occur on our streets every single day. The prospect of even a well-intended and compassionate officer with a gun, a baton, and a uniform approaching that situation invokes a lot of history, a lot of pain, and a lot of trauma, and can and has in many cases made a difficult situation even worse. We've talked a lot, and in fact, we've piloted. We're great at pilots, by the way. We have police community impact teams. They do a great job. We have paired. Chief Hahn, for example, has led the way in hiring Bridget Dean, a full-time social worker in charge of mental health. We've got teams of social workers and police officers who go out and respond to a lot of these calls. We pilot very, very well. But what we haven't done is step back and ask ourselves, what do we want police officers to do and not do in the year 2020? This is the moment to define and redefine what we want and expect our police officers to do. And what we're saying here is that if you are trained to enforce the law and to address serious crime, that's important to protect the public. All of these other situations that you're not as well trained for and that invoke trauma and fear in too many instances, we should be able to provide a different and a better response, not as an exception, not as a pilot, but as the policy of the city of Sacramento, a policy backed by real funding, shifted funding, that supports a new way of responding to the needs of our community.
Next up, I have Teresa Cliff from the Sacramento Bee.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, Teresa, morning.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. The county, Sacramento County, has had an inspector general position for a while, and some say the position is not powerful enough. For example, no deputies were terminated as a result of the McIntyre shooting. I don't believe the county's IG can actually investigate personnel matters. It sounds like what you're proposing, they would, but I'm wondering if you can clarify that as one difference between the two, and also if you can just overall address any concerns that people might have that adding this position won't lead to real accountability.
Okay, this is not the county's inspector general program, even as it was intended to work. I believe this is significantly stronger. What has happened in the interim, just very brief digression, is that in 2018, the legislature passed Assembly Bill 1421. Prior to 1421, I probably could not have made this announcement that we're making today, because the laws that preceded 1421 made it legally impossible for a city to be able to publicly investigate and reveal the findings of any alleged officer misconduct under any circumstances. Before the fact, after the fact, that was the state of the law. 1421 provided 3 clear exceptions that enable a city to release public information, including personnel-related information, when an officer is accused under the 3 categories that I just described a moment ago. Officer-involved shooting, a death while in police custody, and force which results in serious bodily injury to the individual. Sexual assault, you can release, alleged sexual assault, you can also release information, but only after there has been a sustained finding. So it's only in those 3 categories that I described where we have this opening to be able to actually conduct full and complete investigations. And by the way, to the police officers and who may be looking at this say, well, you know, this is just stacked against us. An inspector general will be impartial. We will hire an inspector general who has a track record of skill, assertiveness, and fairness. And it could be that in a given case, an inspector general concludes one way. It could be in another case, an inspector general concludes in a different way. And so, but what it does is add something we don't have now, which is a public, transparent, and open process that allows the public to get an independent opinion before a decision is actually made by the city and the city manager whether or not to go forward. It's a much bigger step, and 1421 allows it, and we are going to take proper advantage of that change in state law.
Next up is Sarah from Cap Radio, followed by Tony at the Sacramento Observer again.
Hi all. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. I guess I had 2 questions. One, I was curious how the Inspector General's how their findings will then result in action from city council or the mayor's office. And I was also wondering if you could give an example, a specific example of how you might envision calls shifting when they do come in, like who will be in charge of deciding whether or not it's something that should be handled by the police department versus something that would be handled by a different sector. So sorry.
Let me contrast on the investigative side, as I understand it, the current process versus what we are calling for. Under the current process, let's say there is an officer-involved shooting. There is a criminal investigation by the police department. There is also an internal affairs investigation, in many cases, depending upon the facts, of the officer, where there is a concern that the officer may have violated his or her authority. All of that is contained within. And when the city makes an ultimate decision through the city manager pursuant to the city charter, whether or not to go forward with disciplinary action, at least prior to 1421, nobody knows about it. And so even though people find ways to know about it, they don't know about it. That is a credibility problem. It is not about any individual. Again, I think we have a great police chief in this city. This is bigger than us. It is a fundamental credibility problem. What do we propose now? We still would maintain the city manager making the ultimate determination, but instead of it being a quiet and secret process, the city manager would have to look at public findings, public conclusions, public recommendations for discipline if warranted, not just from an inspector general, but from a police commission that would have the same ability to take those findings and conclusions and say, well, Inspector General, thank you for your recommendation of X. We believe it should be something different. And then the manager has to make that decision in the full light of the public, knowing what has been recommended by an independent Inspector General and an independent police commission. I think that is a sea change. And I think it will hopefully reverberate, if you will, down the line in a way that keeps our community and its officers safer.
Next up is Tony, and then Teresa.
Yes, Mayor, your proposal, two of them, they seem like they've been well thought out. So, and hopefully we'll find out the strategy behind them. How were you able to put this package together? And did you consult with Chief Hahn, or this is just something that you hashed out with the city attorneys?
Well, in my many years of doing this kind of policy work, I always reach out and consult with people who know more about a subject matter than I do. So of course I consulted the city attorney. Of course I talked with Chief Hahn and the city manager and others and the community, and take all that input in. And then I was informed, honestly, especially with the second proposal, by my own background. If you remember, I was the author of California's Proposition 63, the Mental Health Services Act, the tax on millionaires that runs $2.4 billion in mental health resources through the county. Wish I had known I was going to run for mayor, by the way, when I wrote that law. And so I have long believed, frankly, that we have a broken mental health system, and that part of it is the lack of adequate resources to be able to reach out in safer ways and in more effective ways to people who are in crisis, for people who are having a very, very tough time, for family members. And so this is actually consistent with my life's work around trying to make mental health the public health priority that it must be. we're not just talking about mental health calls. Mental health is maybe the best example. But that's why we want to take these, again, 30 to 60 days to look at the whole wide range of calls that don't involve the actual allegation of a commission of serious crime and break that down so that we can begin shifting appropriately and thoughtfully the calls that don't require a sworn law enforcement officer to respond.
Next up is Teresa, and then I'm going to open up everyone else in case there's any final questions.
Teresa, you're on mute.
All right, sorry about that. I have two just final questions from me that are connected. What is your timeline for this, Mayor, specifically the Inspector General proposal? And also, is it possible that any of the injuries caused by officers during the protest that we saw in recent weeks might be included as far as being eligible for investigation from the Inspector General?
Well, I'm certainly open to that. And my idea is to get these proposals, we need to talk to Councilmember Chenier and my other colleagues, whether it's quickly through the Law and Legislation Committee or directly to the City Council. I think we want to talk about that, and we will. But the idea is to get this to our decision-making body and bodies very, very quickly. I don't want to, very quickly. This can't wait. And yes, so I think I answered both questions. Okay.
Next up is Doug Johnson from Fox 40.
Hey, Mayor, I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about why now? You know, did it really take people marching in the street to do this? Why didn't you do some of these reforms earlier?
I think it is a fair point. My answer is that the events of the past couple of weeks have shaken me to the core. And I believe they have our community and our country. And I am digging and thinking deeper than I ever have been before. I can point to all the good and great things I've done in my public service career. I guess I did one of them here today, but really, it doesn't matter. People don't want to hear what you have done. They want to hear what you are going to do. And yes, I'll tell you, on the independent investigator, we were constrained by law, at least up until 1421 was interpreted, which is only relatively recently. In terms of this systemic change, I've long thought about it. In fact, more than thought about it, I have actually worked on it. That's part of what Prop 63 does. The Mental Health Services Act. It pays in part for outreach workers to do this very kind of work. But this proposal is born out of a lot of reflection. It is born out of not wanting to put forward another series of pilots, again, throughout our community where we try and come back in 6 months or a year and evaluate, and then money's dried up and people, there's a focus on something else. The systems change must begin now, and it will.
Next up is Marissa Perlman, CBS.
Hi, Mayor. One quick follow-up question. Forgive me if you've answered this, but would this Inspector General position be appointed or would the community vote on this? And what's the decision behind that?
Well, so the Inspector General, as we envision it, but this is subject to the decision of the City Council as well as community, would be housed within the Office of Public Safety Accountability. Again, we just introduced Letitia Watson, who is our new Office Director from the state of Texas, and you will get to know her. We are very excited to have her in our city. She brings an incredible track record of digging deep into this work. And the idea is that the Inspector General would be fully independent within the Office of Public Safety Accountability, appropriately so, would report to the director, but also to the city council, and also to the community. In terms of how that person is chosen, completely open to, and in fact, I think it is vital that we have real community input before that actual decision is made.
Okay, last question is from Sarah at Capri.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, one last question. Is just, can you give an example of how that changed call structure will be for rerouting of 911 calls? How do you have specifics? Can you give an example of?
I mean, I can give you a very common example, which I alluded to before. You're a family, and you're struggling with I'm just going to make up a typical example because it's not exclusive to this. You're struggling with a 20-something child in your home who is living at home, who is dealing with a psychiatric issue, a mental health issue. And so it's getting hard, and you don't know what to do, and you know that they need help, including the potential of 5150 or going to the hospital. And so now you call 911, and the only recourse is for officers to come and to intervene. And you know, I will say, the officers I've seen in those situations have always responded in a compassionate way when I have seen this. But it is the wrong way to do it. It is the wrong way to do it. They're not trained as mental health clinicians, and we want them out there dealing with whatever, the gang issues, the serious public safety issues that are going on out in our community. And so in this example, instead you would have a non-law enforcement outreach team out to that house when the family calls in crisis, and you would have them help the family and the individual navigate the right kind of help, the effective kind of help for that individual and the family. And they'll be successful more times than not. That's an example. I want to thank you all. Much more. We will be, again, addressing these proposals and other proposals in public session very, very soon. I really appreciate everyone's attention today, the speakers, and everyone who appeared on the call. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.